First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
How are you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great topic coming our way. 5 tips that all correctional nurse managers must know to survive their career working in a prison or jail. Now, guys, I have not been a nurse manager, so I'm going to have Connie Alleyne lead the way on this discussion. Connie, what's going on?
Hello, everybody. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall and the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. So today's conversation, our discussion really is just to give a little insight to nurse managers. I know a lot of times it can be trial by fire, right? We figure out how to make it work. We figure out how to manage people and juggle all of our conflicting tasks throughout the day. But I can only give some insight from the lens of a health services administrator. So I'm going to do my best to kind of help you guys out.
Now, guys, we do have a few other discussions on being a nurse manager or just a frontline nurse professional in prisons or jails. Please check it out. A lot of good dialogue. One, especially exclusively Connie. Connie was nice enough to kind of just vlog into the camera. I think that was the very beginning. I kind of just tossed you into that one, but the video is doing very good. It's close to 8,000 views. But guys, now if you haven't, to show Tier Talk to you brave men and women that work in corrections, so please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to go over 5 tips so you could be effective as a prison nurse manager. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, and we are back. So, Connie, I thought this was a great idea, great topic. I know that you wrote 5 tips down for us, correct?
I did. So, I mean, I think there's so much that, nurse managers do, and I don't really think that they get the recognition that they deserve for all of the work that they do. And so I think in the midst of juggling, everyday responsibilities, I think there are some solid things that you can do to be pretty effective. So the first tip that I offer is to get away from the desk and walk the floor with your nurses. Many times the nurses are in the unit, they're on the tear, they're wherever they are providing, health services. And the reality is that when they come to you and say, hey, listen, this is what's going on when I'm out doing whatever it is that I need to do. If you don't have the ability to relate to what they're doing because you never did it, or because you don't have that firsthand knowledge of, oh, okay, I know that when you go to this unit, this happens with, with the officers, or this happens with the inmates, whatever that is. I think it really matters, especially to the nurse who's under your supervision. It matters that you really know what's going on the compound. And so I think a lot of times nurse managers are so busy managing the logistics behind the scenes that sometimes they don't get a chance to get out because they're so overwhelmed with everyday responsibilities. They don't get a chance to get out and walk the floor. And I think that is probably the number one thing you could do, because as a nurse manager, you want to be familiar with the responsibilities that the nurses have. You want to be responsible. You want to have the insight into what are those things that can create very challenging times during their workday. You also want to know what's happening, on the compound, what units are really good with getting inmates out, which units are not. Because sometimes as the manager, it may take a conversation with custody, which your nursing frontline person may not feel comfortable to have that conversation. So I think, getting out and being present is really the best thing you could do. My number one of things to have a successful career in this space.
Yeah, I like that, because I think even just in management in general, understanding the dynamic of what's happening on that ground floor, because you have a lot of management sometimes that just hands out work blindly and just expects the outcome, and they don't understand the process. So it's good for, I believe, any manager, especially nurse managers, to get out there and start looking at the process of how the work is done. Because in the end, if you're going to make things easier, that's how you do it, by understanding the process and trying to alleviate whatever it is that could be overwhelming the staff, especially through these times, the COVID time. Medical has been hit pretty hard. What about the second tip, numero dos?
The second tip that I have is to actually learn the skill sets of your nurses. So oftentimes we kind of give out assignments, but we don't really know what are the true skill sets that the nurses bring to the table. I think what we have to do is acknowledge that our nursing folks are very diverse in where they've worked. This one could have worked in a cardiac unit before. This one could have worked in a step down unit. That one could have worked in dialysis. Like, those are like really great skills that they bring into the facility. And oftentimes we don't get to leverage those skills because we don't even know what they're capable of. And the flip side to that is that when you don't know what they're capable of, you also know what they're not. You don't know what they're not capable of. So how do you provide true insight or put them into the right trainings or get them exposed to the right in-services if in fact you don't really know what they're capable of doing? So for me, I think it's really important, one, that we make it our business to learn what skills our nurses are bringing to the table. And really, what are the deficits? Where are they challenged at, where we can provide support, as opposed to waiting for an incident to happen and then, letting that shoe drop? Because I think part of, the nurse manager's responsibility is kind of being able to forecast, right? Like, how do I make sure that my team is strong and put them in positions where they are strong and where they can get any development opportunity that they might need?
Yeah, I think as a nurse manager, I mean, these kind of play out obviously on pretty much in all departments, I'm sure. But as a team leader, great to know the strength of your players. And also, when you have those strong players, they can also help the team, teach them. So you wind up having a well-balanced team. So, yeah, I like that. But again, that kind of falls into also, I don't know if all things fall to number one, but that kind of falls into, understanding the background, but by walking around, getting to know your employees, because some stuff may not be listed in their resumes or, when they're going out for that process. Maybe sometimes it comes through that discussion that you're having with them saying, hey, I didn't know you did that. Oh, yeah, you know what? I did it briefly. I didn't put it on my resume. Well, thank you for telling me this, because, again, that's where that communication comes into play. Now, what about tip number 3? The middle tip.
So tip number 3 is to know the policies and procedures. It is important, in my opinion, that your nursing staff be able to lean on you for any policy, procedure, any protocols, any of the nursing protocols, wound care, chronic clinic, you name it. Like I think, nurses come in, they have this general nursing experience. Working in corrections is very different. And so I think being able to count on the knowledge and experience of the nursing supervisor, I think is really important. That person does need to be pretty versed, because even if in the course of walking and looking and seeing what people are doing, you also need to be able to correct people if they are doing something that's just not the right thing to do. And they may not know it, right? Because what you might do in a traditional work environment may be a little different from what we do in corrections. There may be a protocol in place that you didn't know this went, like I remember we were going through the motions at a point, and they're like, every time you have an encounter, you have to check blood pressure, right? And, one of the nurses, I remember her saying, like, why do we need to do that? That's not what they're here for. And, it was just something that had changed in the protocols. And when it didn't happen, of course, that's when the write-ups happen. And, God forbid there's an incident and you skipped one of the steps that's now part of the protocols. So I would just say, as a nurse manager, it matters that you are very versed in those protocols, the policies, procedures, because your nursing team needs to be able to trust and depend on you for that kind of insight.
Yeah, I want to add on that too, because again, being a supervisor myself, it's also good to know the rules enough to a point where if policy and procedure just doesn't cover it, you know exactly what you can do to kind of bring things back to policy and procedure. I'm not saying break the rules, but maybe be in the process if they need to be rewritten. When you know the rules so well and they don't apply to certain things, you know exactly where, okay, let me get it to this point so I can bring it back. So it's very good for you to know the rules. And I will tell you one thing too, as a nurse manager, and I'm sure just as custody as well, you're going to have to make decisions on the fly. And you can't always lean on what's in policy and procedure, because policy and procedure is really just a foundation. It's not going to cover everything. And then you'll have people on the front line who will challenge a decision when you go to take it outside of policy and procedure. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to be aware when you give that directive or that order, why that specific policy and procedure ain't going to work at that moment, and then go ahead and give the directive in an effort to hopefully bring it back to policy and procedure, or if need be, have that discussion to rewrite that policy and procedure. Would you agree with that, Connie?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, if you don't have the insight into what's the right thing to do to begin with, you don't even know that you have to bring us back to the best practice. So you have to bring us back to the policy and the procedure. So I think that's absolutely correct.
Okay, let's go. I got to introduce it, Connie.
Yes, I know.
Connie, this isn't the fly behind the wall. You know, I have to. It's the only thing I got during the show. This is you. I'm looking forward to the moment where I get to say the next tip.
All right, okay.
Connie, read the teleprompter. Read the teleprompter. The yellow is me. The red is you. No, we don't have teleprompters, guys. Okay, so Connie, without further ado, tip number 4.
So tip number 4 is, it is important that you build a relationship with custody. I believe that as nurse manager, you building that relationship with custody is showing your team that it's okay to work in partnership with custody. I'm not saying that you should compromise and share private medical information. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, it matters that your staff sees that you have a good relationship with custody, that you can go to custody and say, hey, listen, I need help with this. Or, hey, it's not a strained exchange, but it is one that is, we're working on this together. I mean, I've seen it happen with multiple nursing supervisors where there's just this understanding, because there's a point where custody gains such a respect for you as the nurse manager. Like, they trust that you know your stuff, that you're handling your business, and that you got their back. Because ultimately, when something goes down, it is the medical team who's going in, who's trying to stabilize. And custody needs to know, they know what they're doing, right? And so as you build that relationship, whether it's in meetings, you're engaging, whether it's, they called for us to have some sort of team discussion or something. Like, oftentimes I've seen where, some nursings are like, I'm not interested in going to that. Like, that has nothing to do with us. But when we show up and we show that we want to be a part of a team, I think it makes a really big difference. And for the nurse manager to kind of set that example with the other nurses to kind of show, it's okay for us to work with them. It's okay for us to bring them into a meeting because they add value to the discussion. I think those are all things that help us bridge that gap.
Yeah, and Connie, 100% correct. The relationship between medical and custody is essential. Me and Connie have reviewed, I think, a video in the past, multiple videos actually, but where we knew right off the bat, okay, custody and medical have a good working relationship because they kind of knew each other's role. They also helped each other. It was a great fluid thing when it was involved in putting this person into a chair, checking on them medically, but balancing safety and security with medical. And to be honest with you guys, everybody in there has primary roles. So it's great to see people kind of just play it out and it be fluid. And literally there's was hardly any directives given from either end because everybody just knew each other so well that they allowed this person to come in because they knew what that person had to do and they respected what that person had to do. On the adverse of that, when you don't have that relationship and you don't have that trust, then you start seeing hiccups, and we wind up becoming obstacles. We get in each other's way, and we don't know each other's priority. We don't know, when this person needs to come in and when I need to step away. And again, that's because we don't seem to have that trust for each other. So definitely that good working relationship can easily be seen when there's a code that involves custody and medical, both with priorities, but just working together and not getting in each other's way. I think that's something that is very essential, because eventually, guys, if something happens to that inmate or a fallen staff member or whatever it is, because we just don't trust each other enough to kind of be fluid, that's a big liability for the facility to have to deal with. Connie, that was great, Connie, by the way. Good foundation on tip number 4, one of my favorites. Tip number 5, Connie, what do you got for tip number 5?
So tip number 5, it seems so elementary, but I have to say it. I have to say, please listen to the nurses, right? The nurses on the front line are the ones that are seeing where the protocol breaks down. They're the ones seeing where the policy doesn't make sense. They're the ones who also have some insight into other ways that they may have done things in their professional career that were a bit more efficient. So when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about, policy revision, we're talking about ways to work smarter and not harder. We've got so many different backgrounds that we could leverage when nurses come into the facilities. As a nurse manager, if you have someone saying, hey, why do we do this? Or could we do this way? I've done it. I understand that we've got our protocols in place and they're in place for a reason, but just hear them out first before you shoot down an idea, because you never know how that person is coming in prepared to do their very best. And then here you come, every single thing that they may bring forward, there's a reason why we can't do it. I think it's important to explain the reason why we don't do it a certain way, but I don't know that we necessarily say we just can't do it. Sometimes we may not be able to do this, but here's how come, right? Like that conversation matters, but you want the nurses to be engaged in the work and critically thinking about the work. And as they are doing that, they're going to come to you like, hey, I was doing my documentation today and I realized that we do this, but, we did that in the past and it works really well when we do it that way. I remember we were setting up like a chronic care clinic one day, and there was an expectation for us to go out to the units. And in each unit, there was like a room where they could do like an examination or have this chronic care exchange, right? And so the nurse that was tasked with doing it, she was just random on a particular day. She was like, why are we doing like this? If we do it the other way, we get to see more people as opposed to one nurse in one unit one day, one nurse in another unit, because there weren't enough of the need, spread out the way we thought it was. And we just weren't efficient. So it was just listening to this one nurse who happened to be on that post that day. And I feel like if we didn't listen, we would still be struggling to get the chronic care done, right? But I think listening and understanding their point of view, understanding their perspectives, and how that can be applied to make our operation better, I think is really important as a nurse manager.
Yeah, Connie, you also, real quick, I guess as a bonus tip, you mentioned documentation. I think as a nurse manager, they have a very important role when it comes to overseeing what's being logged into those log books, making sure the reports are concise, accurate, obviously, and given in a timely manner, that documentation is being done both in, I guess, whatever has to be given in custody, but also into those EMRs, because again, if there's any complaints about, let's say, medical, and it goes to travel up to, above the institution, probably to the legal system, we go right back to those EMRs. And even if it wasn't the supervising nurse that was dealing directly with that inmate, they will be held responsible because they have some oversight on what's being put into those emergency medical records, correct?
Absolutely. And so, different facilities do in-services on documentation. I think documentation is critical, particularly from the medical side of the house. God forbid there is an incident, the first thing we do is go get the health record, right? We go review it. We want to see who, what, where, why, and when, right? Who did what was the follow-up? Was it followed up? Was it documented? Is there a refusal in place? All the things that we say we're going to do, were they done? And if not, is there a note in there that says why it wasn't done? And I think sometimes we don't put enough stress on the importance of documentation because we assume that it's being done. But I think, understanding the legal implications down the line, should something go awry, it puts a different, perspective out there about why the documentation is really important. So I guess that would be our bonus tip.
Yeah, because you guys do have shift briefings, right? I mean, before someone comes in or takes over, you guys are exchanging information, correct?
Yeah, some facilities still do it. Some facilities have gone away with it because they don't want the overtime, right? They don't want the overlap. And, as much as people try to document so that the oncoming shift understands what's going on, what treatments need to be continued, what work from the shift before wasn't completed that needs to get completed on the next shift. Like all of those communications should happen in person. But there are a lot of facilities that they don't want to incur the overtime. And so they don't have that maybe 5 or 10 minute overlap where, staff can actually pass on information from, the shift before.
Yeah, they got to start bringing that back. I mean, not even just for medical, custody also needs that. Hey, Connie, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would just like to say, you know what? I honestly feel like the nursing staff is the backbone to our operation. They are involved literally in just about every discussion that happens, whether it's the nurse who's in medical, the nurse who's in mental health, whether it's a nurse sitting on the PREA panel, whether it's a nurse who's involved in a medication issue, in a pharmaceutical issue. Like nurses are literally everywhere. And I know that my nurse managers were amazing. And those are the kind of things that they did. And if I wasn't there, if I couldn't be there and I called on one of them to kind of step in, like they'd be able to step in seamlessly. And I think that's something we kind of take for granted. So I just want to say thank you to them for just doing that and being versatile in that way.
Yeah, I thought this was a great dialogue, but I also want people to know that it seems like what you expect, the 5 or 6 tips that we gave, are pretty much the same thing that we would expect from our leaders, even on the custody side, probably in almost any department. So it kind of brings our worlds together. I mean, whatever the specific function is, the foundation is pretty much the same, walking around, proper documentation, just good working relationship, know who your players are, so I thought that kind of played out well. So even if you're on the custody side and on the supervisory side, you can still get a lot from this because it translates very simply into what you need to do as a supervisor. So again, thanks, Connie. I appreciate the 5 tips or 6, the extra bonus one if you stayed to the end. I should have announced that at the beginning to motivate people to stay at the end. 5 tip, but you want that extra bonus tip, stay right to the very end. But I failed to do that. So if you stayed to the very end, there's a surprise bonus tip for you. Something that came along the way. As always, guys, the show is tiered. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.